The whistle of the Kansas Pacific Railway sliced through the summer air, piercing the serenity of the plains like an arrow as the train hissed to a stop at a weathered platform that seemed to rise from nowhere among the golden grasslands of the Colorado Territory in 1875. Josephine Jenkins clutched her small valise with white knuckles, her heart pounding against her corset as she peered through the dusty window at the ramshackle collection of buildings that certainly did not resemble the bustling town of Denver she was meant to arrive in as Mr. Frederick Morley's mail-order bride. The conductor's voice boomed through the car, "Eureka Springs. 15-minute stop for water." Josephine's stomach dropped. Eureka Springs. This wasn't right. She was supposed to continue on to Denver. Panic rose in her throat as she fumbled with her ticket, rereading the destination printed there. Denver, Colorado Territory. Her hazel eyes darted up to meet the conductor's impatient gaze. "Sir, I believe there's been a mistake. My ticket is for Denver." The conductor's mustache twitched as he examined her ticket. "No mistake, miss. You're ticketed through to Denver. Train leaves in 15 minutes. He tipped his hat and moved on to the next passenger. Relief flooded through Josephine, but as she settled back against the worn velvet seat, a strange feeling tugged at her, a mixture of curiosity and something else she couldn't quite name. Impulsively, she gathered her valise and reticule and stepped toward the door. Perhaps a breath of fresh air would settle her nerves. The platform was hot under the afternoon sun, the weathered boards creaking beneath her high-buttoned boots. Josephine took a deep breath of the dry, sage-scented air, so different from the coal smoke and factory fumes of Philadelphia she'd left behind. She wandered toward the edge of the platform, drawn by the wild beauty of the landscape, endless rolling plains meeting distant mountains that shimmered blue in the haze. Lost in her thoughts, she didn't notice the commotion until it was too late. A wagon laden with barrels came barreling down the dusty road alongside the tracks, the team of horses spooked by something unseen. The driver fought the reins, shouting desperately as the wagon careened toward the station. Passengers scattered, and in the chaos, someone knocked into Josephine, sending her sprawling backward onto the platform, her valise flying from her hand. By the time the dust settled and she regained her footing, a sinking realization hit her: the train was pulling away, steam billowing from its stack, wheels gathering momentum as it chugged away from the station. Her ticket, her possessions, her future all disappearing down the track toward Denver without her. "No, wait," Josephine cried, running a few desperate steps after the train before stopping, knowing it was futile. Her shoulders slumped as she watched her planned life recede into the distance. She was stranded in a town she'd never heard of, with nothing but her reticule containing a few dollars, a handkerchief, and the letter from Mr. Morley confirming their arrangement. "Looks like you might be staying a spell in Eureka Springs after all," came a deep voice from behind her. Josephine turned to find herself face to face with a tall man dressed in trail-worn clothes, a dusty Stetson pulled low over eyes as blue as the Colorado sky, a chambray shirt open at the collar revealing sun-bronzed skin, and leather chaps over denim trousers. Despite his rugged appearance, there was a gentleness in his expression that gave her pause. I was meant for Denver," she said, her voice quavering slightly. "I'm a mail-order bride, you see, and my intended is expecting me on this very train." The man's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Mail-order bride, huh?" He removed his hat, revealing thick waves of sandy brown hair. "Well, miss, seems to me you got off at the wrong stop." Josephine bit her lip, fighting back tears of frustration. "It wasn't by choice, I assure you." A slow smile spread across his weathered face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. Then it's the right one for me, he said, before quickly adding, I mean for the town. Eureka Springs could use more fine ladies such as yourself. He extended a calloused hand. Wade Everett, miss. I run the ES ranch just outside of town. Josephine hesitated before taking his hand. Josephine Jenkins. It seems I find myself in need of assistance, Mr. Everett. Just Wade, please. He released her hand and glanced around the now empty platform. First things first, we need to send a telegram to your intended in Denver. Let him know what happened. Josephine nodded gratefully. Yes, thank you, and I'll need a place to stay until the next train. Wade's expression clouded slightly. About that, train only comes through here twice a week. Next one's not until Saturday. Saturday? But today's only Tuesday, Josephine exclaimed, her composure finally cracking. What am I to do for 4 days in a town where I know no one? Wade picked up her valise, dusting it off before handing it back to her. Eureka Springs may be small, but we're hospitable. Mrs. Tully runs a boarding house for respectable ladies. I'll take you there, and we'll get that telegram sent. After that, well, I reckon you might just find there's more to our little town than meets the eye. As they walked down the dusty Main Street, Josephine felt the stares of the townspeople curious, appraising, some friendly and others less so. She clutched her valise tighter, suddenly aware of how out of place she must look in her city traveling suit with its fashionable bustle and tailored jacket. Don't mind them, Wade said quietly. New faces are rare enough to cause a stir, especially one as pretty as yours. Josephine felt a blush creep up her neck at his forthright compliment. Back in Philadelphia, gentlemen were far more circumspect in their remarks. But there was something refreshing about his honesty that she couldn't help but appreciate. The telegraph office was a small building with a faded sign hanging crookedly from its awning. Inside, a thin man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose looked up from his machine. Afternoon, Wade. What brings you to town midweek? Got a lady here needs to send an urgent wire to Denver, Wade replied, gesturing to Josephine. The telegrapher's eyebrows rose as he took in Josephine's appearance. Madam, he acknowledged with a nod. What message would you like to send? Josephine stepped forward, composing her thoughts. To Mr. Frederick Morley, Denver, accidentally disembarked at Eureka Springs, will arrive on Saturday's train. Please advise if arrangements should change. Sincerely, Josephine Jenkins. As the telegrapher tapped out her message, Josephine turned to find Wade watching her with an unreadable expression. This Mr. Morley, he said carefully. You've met him before. Josephine shook her head. No, our arrangement was made through correspondence. He's a banker in Denver, widowed with 2 young children. She hesitated before adding, his advertisement said he sought a sensible woman of good character to be a mother to his children and a helpmate in his household. Wade's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I see, and that's what you want. To be a helpmate to a stranger, Josephine bristled slightly at his tone. What I want, Mr. Everett, is security and respectability. My father died last winter, leaving considerable debts. I had few options. The telegrapher cleared his throat. That'll be 50 cents, madam. Josephine opened her reticule and counted out the coins, suddenly aware of how few remained. Wade must have noticed her concern. Mrs. Tully's rates are reasonable, he assured her as they stepped back into the sunlight. And if you need work to tide you over, I'm sure someone in town could use an extra pair of hands. I'm trained as a school teacher, Josephine offered, though I've also done secretarial work. Wade brightened. Is that so? Our school teacher, Miss Wilson, has been feeling poorly lately. Might be she'd welcome some assistance, even for a few days. They continued down the street to a 2-story clapboard house with a neat garden and a sign reading, Tully's Boarding House, Respectable Ladies Only. As they approached, a plump woman in an apron appeared on the porch, wiping her hands. "Wade Everett, what mischief brings you to my doorstep?" Her stern expression melted into a smile as she noticed Josephine. "And who's this lovely young lady, Mrs. Tully?" "This is Miss Josephine Jenkins. She had a bit of trouble with the train and needs lodging until Saturday." Mrs. Tully's eyes crinkled warmly. "Well, you've come to the right place, dear. I've a nice room at the back of the house with a view of the mountains. $2 for the week, meals included." Josephine's relief must have shown on her face. "That sounds perfect, Mrs. Tully. Thank you. Get settled in and then come down for supper at 6. We've got chicken and dumplings tonight." She turned to Wade. "You're welcome to stay too, though you'll have to eat in the kitchen like the other men." Wade touched the brim of his hat. "Another time, perhaps. Got to get back to the ranch before dark." He turned to Josephine. "I'll check on you tomorrow, see if Miss Wilson needs help at the schoolhouse." "That's very kind of you, Mr. Wade," Josephine corrected herself. "I appreciate all your assistance." Something flickered in Wade's eyes, amusement, perhaps, or something warmer. "Just being neighborly, Miss Jenkins. Welcome to Eureka Springs." As he strode away, Josephine couldn't help watching his retreating figure, tall and straight-backed, moving with the easy confidence of a man at home in his own skin. She quickly chided herself for her foolish thoughts. In a few days, she would be in Denver, meeting her future husband and beginning her new life as Mrs. Frederick Morley. This brief detour was nothing more than an inconvenience, an anecdote she might tell her stepchildren someday. So why did she feel a strange reluctance as Mrs. Tully ushered her inside? The boarding house was clean and comfortable, if sparsely furnished. Josephine's room contained a narrow bed, a washstand with a porcelain basin and pitcher, a small writing desk, and a wardrobe just large enough for the few dresses she had packed. After washing the travel dust from her face and hands, she changed into a simpler day dress and made her way downstairs for the evening meal. The dining room held a long table where 4 other women were already seated. Mrs. Tully made quick introductions. Miss Martha Pierce, the milliner; Mrs. Eleanor Crawford, a widow who ran the town's only bakery; Miss Beatrice Fowler, a seamstress; and Mrs. Sarah Johnson, whose husband owned the mercantile store. All regarded Josephine with undisguised curiosity. "So you're a mail-order bride," Mrs. Crawford said as they passed the bread basket. "That takes courage, traveling all this way to marry a stranger." "It's a practical arrangement," Josephine replied, trying not to sound defensive. "Mr. Morley needs a mother for his children, and I need a respectable situation." "And what of love?" asked Miss Fowler wistfully. "Do you not hope for that as well?" Josephine carefully buttered a piece of bread. "I believe mutual respect and shared purpose make for a more lasting foundation than fleeting emotions." "Spoken like someone who's never been in love," Mrs. Johnson said with a knowing smile. "I've seen enough unhappy marriages based on supposedly romantic attachments," Josephine countered, thinking of her own parents' volatile relationship. "I prefer to enter matrimony with clear eyes and practical expectations." The conversation shifted to local matters, and Josephine was grateful to be out of the spotlight. As the women debated the merits of the new shipment of fabrics at the mercantile and speculated on whether the harvest dance would be held in the town hall or the schoolhouse, she found herself wondering about Wade Everett. What kind of ranch did he run? Was he married? None of the women had mentioned a Mrs. Everett. After dinner, as Josephine helped clear the table, Mrs. Tully confirmed her curiosity had not gone unnoticed. "Wade's one of the good ones," the older woman said as they stacked dishes. "Came here 5 years ago with nothing but his horse and saddle, bought a run-down spread that nobody thought would amount to much. Now the ES Ranch raises some of the finest horses in the territory. He seems very capable, Josephine said carefully. Mrs. Tully's eyes twinkled. That he is. And single too, though not for lack of interest from the local ladies. Man like that, hard-working, honest, easy on the eyes, he could have his pick. But he keeps to himself, mostly. I'm not inquiring about his marital status, Mrs. Tully, Josephine said primly. I was merely curious about a man who showed me kindness when I was in distress. Of course you were, dear, Mrs. Tully replied, not bothering to hide her amusement. Now, if you're headed to the schoolhouse tomorrow, you'll want to be up early. Miss Wilson starts her lessons at 8 sharp. In her room that night, Josephine sat at the small desk and penned a letter to her aunt in Philadelphia, the only family she had left. She described her mishap with the train and her unexpected stay in Eureka Springs, making light of the situation to prevent worry. She mentioned Wade only briefly, noting his assistance in finding her lodging. As she sealed the envelope, she told herself it was because the man was of no consequence to her future, merely a helpful stranger in a town she would soon leave behind. But when she finally blew out her lamp and settled into the unfamiliar bed, it was Wade's sky-blue eyes and quiet strength that followed her into her dreams, not the imagined face of her intended husband. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster, and the smell of coffee and frying bacon wafting up from the kitchen below. Josephine dressed carefully in her most serviceable dress, navy blue with white piping at the collar and cuffs, and twisted her chestnut hair into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. Her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand showed a composed young woman of 23, her features pleasant if not conventionally beautiful, with intelligent hazel eyes that her father had always said revealed too much of her thoughts. Breakfast at Mrs. Tully's was a simple but hearty affair: fried eggs, bacon, biscuits with honey and strong coffee. Josephine ate quickly, mindful of the time. Just as she was rising from the table, there was a knock at the front door, and Mrs. Tully returned moments later with Wade Everett in tow. "Morning, ladies," he said, removing his hat. He was dressed much as he had been the day before, though in a clean shirt, and his hair was damp as if recently washed. His eyes found Josephine's across the room. "Miss Jenkins, I spoke with Miss Wilson yesterday evening. She'd be mighty pleased to have your help at the schoolhouse today." Josephine couldn't help the flutter of satisfaction she felt at being useful so quickly. "That's wonderful news. I was just on my way." Wade gestured toward the door. "Thought I might walk you there, seeing as you're new to town." The other women exchanged meaningful glances that Josephine pretended not to notice as she gathered her reticule. "Thank you, Mr. Everett. That's very kind." Outside, the morning was fresh and cool, the sun just beginning to burn away the mist that clung to the distant mountains. Eureka Springs looked different in the clear light of day, less desolate, more charming with its mix of rustic practicality and frontier aspirations. A few of the larger buildings boasted false fronts with painted signs advertising their businesses: Johnson's Mercantile, Eureka Springs Bank and Trust, the Lucky Spur Saloon, Crawford's Bakery. "It's bigger than I thought," Josephine admitted as they walked. "When we arrived yesterday, I only saw the station and a few buildings." Wade nodded. "We've grown some in recent years, about 500 souls now, counting the ranches and homesteads nearby. Not Denver, of course, but we get by." "How long have you lived here?" she asked, genuinely curious. 5 years, give or take. Came west after the war, worked cattle drives for a spell, then decided I wanted roots somewhere. A shadow crossed his face briefly. "After what I saw during the war, I needed somewhere quiet, somewhere I could build something good." "You fought in the war?" Josephine asked softly. Wade nodded. "Union cavalry. Enlisted in '63 when I was 18, fought till Appomattox. He didn't elaborate, and Josephine didn't press. She'd seen enough returning soldiers in Philadelphia to recognize the reluctance to dwell on those memories. And the ES ranch, you built that yourself? A genuine smile broke through his serious expression. From the ground up. Started with 30 acres of rocky pasture nobody wanted, a broken-down cabin, and 3 sorry-looking mares. Now I've got 160 acres, a proper house, and 20 of the finest horses this side of the Mississippi. You must be very proud, Josephine said, noting the way his entire demeanor lightened when speaking of his accomplishments. It's a good life, he said simply. Hard work, but my own. That means something. They reached a whitewashed building with a small bell tower, the schoolhouse. As they approached, a thin woman of indeterminate middle age emerged, leaning heavily on a cane. Mr. Everett. You've brought our savior, I see, she called, her voice surprisingly robust despite her frail appearance. Miss Wilson, this is Miss Jenkins, Wade introduced them. She's a trained school teacher. Thank the Lord, Miss Wilson said fervently. This rheumatism is getting the better of me, and these children need a firm hand. Come in, come in. The little monsters will be arriving any minute. Josephine shot Wade a slightly alarmed look, which he answered with a suppressed smile. Miss Wilson loves her pupils dearly, despite her complaints, he murmured as they followed the older woman inside. The schoolroom was simple but well organized, with rows of desks facing a larger teacher's desk and blackboard. Maps of the United States and the world hung on one wall, while the alphabet in large letters adorned another. A small stove in the corner provided heat in colder weather. We've got 23 pupils enrolled, ages 6 to 16, Miss Wilson explained, settling carefully into a chair near the desk. The older ones come only when farm and ranch work permits, of course. Today being Wednesday, we should have most of them. I'm meant to be teaching arithmetic, grammar, geography, and history, though some days I feel I'm mostly teaching manners and keeping the peace. I'm familiar with the challenges, Josephine assured her. I taught at a charity school in Philadelphia for 3 years. Miss Wilson's eyebrows rose. Well then, you've likely seen worse than our frontier ruffians. I'll leave you to it, shall I? The lesson plans are in the desk drawer, and I'll be right here if you need me. Wade, who had been standing near the door, cleared his throat. I'll head on then. Got business at the Mercantile before I ride back to the ranch. He hesitated, then added, Miss Jenkins, if you'd like, I could show you around the area a bit tomorrow. There's some mighty pretty country hereabouts. Before Josephine could answer, the schoolhouse door burst open and a stream of children poured in, their chatter filling the room with noise and energy. Their curious eyes darted between their teacher, the stranger, and Wade. Another time, perhaps, Josephine said, already turning her attention to her new charges. Thank you again for your assistance, Mr. Everett. Wade touched his hat and slipped out, leaving Josephine to begin the difficult task of establishing authority with a roomful of curious, energetic children in a town where she'd spend less than a week. To her surprise, the day passed quickly and pleasantly. Once the initial novelty wore off, the children proved attentive and eager to learn, if somewhat behind their city counterparts in formal education. What they lacked in book learning, however, they made up for in practical knowledge and self-sufficiency. Even the youngest could tie complex knots, identify dozens of plants and animals, and perform mental arithmetic for practical problems like calculating how many fence posts were needed for a given length. Miss Wilson observed from her chair, occasionally offering a suggestion or explanation about a particular student's circumstances, but largely leaving Josephine to manage the classroom. By the time the final bell rang at 3 o'clock, Josephine felt a warm glow of satisfaction she hadn't experienced since leaving her teaching position in Philadelphia. "You have a gift," Miss Wilson said as the last child disappeared out the door. "The children responded well to you." "They're delightful students," Josephine replied, gathering papers from the desks. "You've done an excellent job with them." Miss Wilson waved away the compliment. "What are your plans after you reach Denver? Will you teach there as well?" Josephine hesitated. "I'm not certain. My intended is a banker with 2 young children. He may prefer that I focus on the household rather than seek employment." Miss Wilson murmured, her expression thoughtful. "And is that what you want, to focus solely on homemaking?" "I want security," Josephine said, echoing her words to Wade. "Teaching is a noble profession, but the pay is meager and the position is lost if one marries. As a banker's wife, I can provide a stable home for his children while maintaining my respectability." "A very rational approach," Miss Wilson said, though something in her tone suggested she found it lacking. "Well, we would be fortunate indeed if you could continue helping until your train departs. My joints appreciate the rest." "I'd be happy to," Josephine agreed. "It feels good to be useful." As she walked back to the boarding house, Josephine found herself noticing more details about the town, the way the afternoon sun gilded the false fronts of the buildings, the easy camaraderie among the townspeople who nodded and greeted her, the unexpected beauty of the rugged landscape surrounding the settlement. She stopped at the mercantile to purchase a few necessary items, a hair ribbon to replace one lost in her hasty departure from the train, some writing paper, and a small bottle of lavender water. The proprietor, a balding man with spectacles perched low on his nose, smiled when she approached the counter. "You must be Miss Jenkins. My wife mentioned we had a visitor staying at Mrs. Tully's." "Word travels quickly in small towns, I see," Josephine said, returning his smile. "That it does." "I'm Herbert Johnson. My Sarah says you're headed to Denver to get married." He wrapped her purchases in brown paper. "Shame you can't stay longer. We could use a school teacher of our own. Miss Wilson's been talking of retiring for years." "Oh, I'm just helping temporarily," Josephine demurred. "My train leaves Saturday." Mr. Johnson nodded, a twinkle in his eye. "So I hear, though folks have been known to change their minds about such things. Wade Everett was just in here singing your praises." Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Everett was very kind to assist me yesterday when I missed my train." "Kind, yes. Wade's that." Mr. Johnson handed over her wrapped package. "That'll be 75 cents, miss." As Josephine counted out the coins, she realized her funds were dwindling faster than anticipated. If she needed to purchase a new ticket to Denver, she would be in a difficult position. Perhaps she should inquire about compensation for her teaching services. Lost in these practical considerations, she didn't notice the man approaching until he was directly in her path, a tall, thick-set fellow with a florid complexion and the unmistakable swagger of one who had been drinking, despite the early hour. "Well, well," he drawled, blocking her way. "What have we here? A new filly in the corral, and a pretty one at that." Josephine stiffened, clutching her package tighter. "Excuse me, sir," she said firmly, attempting to step around him. He moved to block her again, close enough now that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "No need to be in such a hurry, darlin'. Why don't you let Jake Maddox buy you a drink over at the Lucky Spur?" "No, thank you," Josephine replied coldly. "Please let me pass." Jake reached out to touch her arm. "Now, don't be like that. The lady said no, Maddox." Josephine turned to find Wade standing behind her, his expression hard as granite. He moved between her and Jake with deliberate slowness. "This ain't your concern, Everett," Jake growled, though he took a step back. Miss Jenkins is under my protection while she's in town, Wade said quietly. So I'm making it my concern. The two men stared at each other for a long moment, tension crackling between them like lightning. Finally, Jake spat on the ground and stalked away, muttering obscenities. "Are you all right?" Wade asked, his expression softening as he turned to Josephine. She nodded, surprised to find her hands trembling slightly. "Yes, thank you. I'm not accustomed to such forward behavior." "Jake Maddox's trouble even when he's sober, which isn't often," Wade said grimly. "Best to give him a wide berth." He glanced at the package in her hands. "Been shopping." "Just a few necessities," she replied, grateful for the change of subject. "And I spent the day at the schoolhouse. Miss Wilson has asked me to continue helping until I leave." Wade's face brightened. "That's good. The children will benefit from your experience." He hesitated, then added, "I meant what I said earlier about showing you around. There's a spot up on the ridge where you can see clear to the mountains. Thought you might like to see it, get a feel for the country." Josephine knew she should refuse. What was the point in becoming more familiar with a place she would leave in a few days? Yet something in Wade's expression, hopeful but restrained, as if he expected disappointment, made her say, "That sounds lovely. Perhaps tomorrow after school." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise over the plains. "I'll fetch you at the schoolhouse." 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock, she confirmed, unable to keep from smiling in return. As they parted ways, Josephine told herself it was merely politeness that prompted her acceptance, gratitude for his assistance and protection. It would be churlish to refuse such a neighborly offer. And if her heart beat a little faster at the thought of spending more time in Wade Everett's company, well, that was nothing more than a natural response to a handsome, kind man. It signified nothing deeper. At dinner that evening, Mrs. Tully's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooling anyone but herself. The next day dawned clear and bright, the September air carrying just a hint of the autumn to come. Josephine dressed with particular care in her green poplin day dress, her second best, saved for Sundays and special occasions. She told herself it was merely appropriate to look presentable for an outing, but the extra time she spent arranging her hair and the touch of rose water at her wrists belied her attempt at indifference. At the schoolhouse, she found concentration difficult. Miss Wilson noticed her distraction and raised an eyebrow when Josephine had to ask a student to repeat a question for the third time. "Expecting a visitor this afternoon?" the older woman asked during the lunch break, her tone innocent but her eyes shrewd. Josephine busied herself wiping the blackboard. "Mr. Everett offered to show me some of the local scenery. Since I'm leaving Saturday, it seemed a good opportunity to see more of the area." "Indeed," Miss Wilson said dryly. "Wade Everett doesn't offer guided tours to just anyone, you know." Josephine turned, chalk dust coating her fingers. "What do you mean?" Miss Wilson sighed. "Only that Wade is well regarded in this community for good reason. He's a man of integrity and kindness, but he keeps his own counsel and his own company, for the most part. If he's taken an interest in you, it's not to be taken lightly. He's being neighborly to a stranded traveler," Josephine insisted. "Nothing more." "If you say so, dear," Miss Wilson replied in a tone that suggested she knew better. "Just be careful with his heart, that's all. He's had enough disappointment for one lifetime." Before Josephine could ask what she meant, the children began filtering back in from their lunch break, and the conversation was necessarily abandoned. But Miss Wilson's words lingered in her mind throughout the afternoon lessons. What disappointments had Wade faced? And was Miss Wilson right about his interest being more than neighborly kindness? At precisely 3 o'clock, Wade appeared at the schoolhouse door, hat in hand. He traded his work clothes for a clean shirt and his better pair of denims, and his hair was neatly combed. The care he'd taken with his appearance sent a flutter through Josephine's stomach. "Right on time," Miss Wilson observed with a smile. "Off you go, Miss Jenkins. I can manage the cleanup." Outside, Wade led Josephine to where two horses waited, tethered to the hitching post. One was a sleek chestnut gelding, the other, a gentle-looking dapple gray mare. "Hope you don't mind riding," Wade said. "The spot I want to show you is a few miles out of town." Josephine hesitated. "I've ridden before, but it's been some time." "Daisy here is the gentlest mount on my ranch," Wade assured her, patting the gray's neck. "She'll take good care of you." With Wade's assistance, Josephine mounted side saddle, arranging her skirts as modestly as possible. Wade swung easily into his own saddle, and they set off at a comfortable walk through town and then out into the open country. The land around Eureka Springs was a patchwork of golden grasslands, rocky outcroppings, and scattered stands of pine and aspen. As they rode, Wade pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area, how the town got its name when prospectors found a small gold deposit in the nearby creek, long since played out, which wildflowers would bloom come spring, and how the mountains changed color with the shifting light. Josephine found herself entranced, not just by the landscape, but by the way Wade described it with a quiet reverence that spoke of deep love for this wild, beautiful country. His usual reserve melted away as he talked about his adopted home, and she glimpsed a different side of him, passionate, articulate, almost poetic in his observations. After about an hour's ride, they reached a ridge overlooking a vast expanse of territory. Wade dismounted and helped Josephine down from her horse, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The brief contact sent a shock of awareness through her that she tried desperately to ignore. "This is it," he said, leading her to the edge of the ridge. "Best view in the county." Josephine gasped as she took in the panorama before them. The land rolled away in golden waves to the feet of the mountains, which rose in majestic tiers of purple and blue against the sky. A river glinted like a silver ribbon in the valley below, and in the far distance, she could just make out tiny specks that Wade identified as his cattle. "It's magnificent," she breathed. "I've never seen anything like it." Wade smiled, pleased by her reaction. "City folk sometimes see nothing but emptiness out here. They miss the life that's all around if you know how to look." "Show me," Josephine said impulsively. Wade's smile widened. He pointed out distant antelope grazing on the plain, a hawk circling overhead, the different types of grasses and shrubs that sustained life in this seemingly harsh environment. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, the landscape transformed, shadows lengthening and colors deepening to rich golds and purples. They sat on a flat rock overlooking the valley, sharing the simple provisions Wade had packed: fresh bread, cheese, dried apple slices, and a canteen of cool water. The easy silence between them was comfortable, broken only by occasional observations about the changing light or a question from Josephine about something she spotted in the distance. "Can I ask you something, Wade?" Josephine said finally, gathering her courage. "Anything," he replied, his blue eyes serious as they met hers. "Miss Wilson mentioned that you've had disappointments. What did she mean?" Wade was quiet for so long that Josephine began to regret her question. Just as she was about to apologize for prying, he spoke. "I was engaged once back east, before the war." His voice was low, matter-of-fact, but Josephine sensed the old pain beneath his words. "Her name was Caroline. We grew up together in Kentucky, planned to marry when I turned 21. He looked out toward the mountains. "Then the war came. I joined up with the Union, which didn't sit well with her family. They were Southern sympathizers, though Kentucky never seceded." "What happened?" Josephine asked gently. She wrote me a letter. Said she couldn't wait, couldn't bear the shame of being engaged to a Yankee soldier. Married a Confederate officer while I was fighting at Chancellorsville. His mouth twisted in a humorless smile. Got her letter the same day I took a Minier ball to the shoulder. Nearly died from the infection. I'm sorry, Josephine said, resisting the urge to touch his hand in comfort. Wade shrugged. Long time ago now, but it taught me something important about loyalty, about what matters when things get hard. He turned to look at her directly. That's why I don't understand this mail-order bride business. How can you promise forever to someone you've never even met? Josephine felt a flush rise to her cheeks. It's a practical arrangement, as I've said. Many successful marriages have begun with less. And what happens if you get to Denver and find you can't abide the man, or he's cruel to his children? Or he expects things from you that, Wade broke off, his jaw tightening. I'm speaking out of turn. Forgive me. No, your questions are fair, Josephine admitted. The truth is, I don't know what I'll do if Mr. Morley proves to be different from his letters, but I have few options, Wade. My father left nothing but debts. I have no brothers to support me, no inheritance to sustain me. Society offers limited paths for a woman alone. You could stay here, Wade said quietly. Eureka Springs needs a teacher. You've already proven yourself with the children. Josephine's heart lurched at his words. I have obligations, a contract of sorts. A contract that hasn't even been fulfilled yet, Wade pointed out. You haven't met the man, haven't made any vows. It wouldn't be honorable to simply abandon the agreement, Josephine argued, though she felt her resolve wavering under his steady gaze. More honorable than entering a marriage with doubts, Wade asked. More honorable than denying what's happening between us, Josephine's breath caught. And what is happening between us, Wade? Instead of answering with words, Wade leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers, a question, not a demand. Josephine knew she should pull away, should remind him of her commitment to another man. Instead, she found herself responding, her lips softening under his as something warm and inevitable unfurled in her chest. The kiss remained gentle, almost tentative, but when Wade finally drew back, Josephine felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world. They looked at each other in the golden light of the setting sun, 1,000 unspoken words hanging in the air between them. I should take you back, Wade said finally, his voice rough with emotion. It'll be dark soon. The ride back to town was quieter, both lost in their thoughts. As the lights of Eureka Springs came into view, Josephine knew she needed to make a decision. The telegram from Mr. Morley had arrived that morning, a brief message confirming he would expect her on Saturday's train. She had less than 48 hours to decide whether to honor her commitment or follow this new, unexpected path that had opened before her. At the boarding house, Wade helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Will I see you tomorrow? He asked, his expression guarded as if bracing for rejection. I'll be at the schoolhouse, Josephine replied, not quite an answer to his real question. Wade nodded, understanding her hesitation. I've said my piece, Josephine. The rest is up to you. He mounted his horse and tipped his hat. Sleep well. As Josephine watched him ride away, she knew sleep would be the last thing on her mind that night. The next morning brought no clarity. Josephine went through her teaching duties mechanically, her thoughts in turmoil. The children sensed her distraction and were unusually subdued, exchanging glances when she lost her place in the reading lesson or stared out the window for long minutes. At lunch, Miss Wilson hobbled over to where Josephine sat at the teacher's desk, absently picking at her bread and cheese. You look like a woman with a decision to make, she observed, settling into a nearby chair. Josephine managed a weak smile. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's lived long enough to recognize the signs. Miss Wilson studied her thoughtfully. May I offer some unsolicited advice? Please, Josephine said, desperate for any guidance. I was engaged once many years ago, Miss Wilson began, to a lawyer in St. Louis. A good man, respectable, well-established. My parents were delighted. I told myself I was fortunate to make such a match. She paused, her gaze distant with memory. Then I received an offer to teach out here on the frontier. The pay was poor, the conditions primitive, but something in me couldn't refuse. I told myself it would be a brief adventure before settling into marriage. What happened? Josephine asked, though she suspected she knew. I fell in love with this place, with this life. The freedom, the purpose, the community. Miss Wilson's smile was bittersweet. I wrote to my fiancé asking him to join me. He refused, insisted I return to St. Louis immediately. When I declined, he broke our engagement. You don't regret your choice? Josephine asked. Not for a moment, Miss Wilson replied firmly. I've had a life of meaning and purpose. I've shaped generations of young minds. And yes, there have been lonely moments, but never regrets. She reached over to pat Josephine's hand. The point, my dear, is that sometimes the wrong turn leads to the right place, and sometimes what looks like security from a distance turns out to be a cage when viewed up close. Josephine considered her words. But what of honor, keeping one's word? The greatest honor lies in being true to yourself, Miss Wilson said gently. What does your heart tell you? Before Josephine could answer, a commotion outside drew their attention. Children crowded at the windows, pointing and exclaiming. Miss Wilson rose to investigate, returning moments later with a grave expression. It seems there's been trouble at the Lucky Spur. That man, Maddox, and his friends got into a fight with some of the ranch hands. Wade Everett stepped in to break it up and took a bad blow to the head. They've taken him to Doc Evans's office. Josephine's heart seemed to stop. Without conscious thought, she was on her feet. I need to go to him. Miss Wilson nodded. Of course you do. I'll manage here. Josephine hurried through town to the small building that served as both doctor's office and living quarters. Inside, she found a gray-haired man with a kindly face bending over Wade, who lay still on an examination table, a bloodied bandage wrapped around his head. Miss Jenkins, the doctor greeted her, not seeming surprised by her presence. I'm Dr. Evans. How is he? Josephine asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she approached the table. Concussion, certainly. Possible skull fracture, though I don't think so. He was conscious when they brought him in, knew his name and where he was, which is a good sign. But he's going to need close watching for the next day or two. Josephine reached for Wade's hand, which felt unnaturally cool in hers. I'll stay with him. Dr. Evans raised an eyebrow. That's kind of you, but he should really be at home in his own bed. Problem is, the ranch is a good hour's ride, and he's in no condition to make the journey right now. Could he stay at Mrs. Tully's? Josephine suggested. Just until he's well enough to travel home. The doctor considered this. Mrs. Tully's is for ladies only, as I recall. But perhaps the hotel. I'll take him to my place, came a new voice from the doorway. Josephine turned to see the telegrapher, Mr. Peterson, standing there. Got a spare room and I live just down the street. Wade's a good friend, happy to look after him. That would be ideal, Dr. Evans agreed. Thank you, Henry. With the doctor's and Mr. Peterson's help, Wade was carefully moved to the telegrapher's modest home and settled in the spare bedroom. He drifted in and out of consciousness during the transfer, mumbling incoherently but squeezing Josephine's hand when she spoke to him. I can sit with him, she offered once Wade was settled. At least until I need to return to Mrs. Tully's for dinner. Mr. Peterson nodded. I'd appreciate that. Got to mind the telegraph office till 5. Doc Evans said to wake him every hour or so, make sure he knows who he is and where he is. Once alone with Wade, Josephine pulled a chair close to the bed and studied his face. Even in unconsciousness, his features held a strength and character that stirred something deep within her. The steady rise and fall of his chest reassured her, but the bandage around his head and the bruising beginning to show along his jaw were stark reminders of how quickly things could change, how precious and precarious life could be. "Wade," she said softly, touching his shoulder. "Wade, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered, then opened slowly, revealing a gaze clouded with pain and confusion. "Josephine," he murmured. "What happened? You were hurt breaking up a fight," she explained, relief washing through her at his recognition. "You're at Mr. Peterson's house." "The doctor says you need to rest." Wade frowned, then winced at the movement. "Maddox, he and his boys were hassling Jesse Turner, calling him a half-breed." His speech was slightly slurred but coherent. "Jesse works for me. Good kid. Couldn't let them talk to him that way." "Of course you couldn't," Josephine agreed, tears pricking at her eyes. Even injured, Wade's first concern was for his worker. It spoke volumes about the man he was. Wade's eyes drifted closed again, but his hand sought hers, fingers intertwining when she offered it. "Stay," he asked, the single word holding a world of vulnerability. "I'm here," she promised. "Rest now." As the afternoon wore on, Josephine roused Wade periodically as instructed, relieved each time when he recognized her and answered her simple questions correctly. Between these checks, she sat quietly, holding his hand and thinking about the choice that lay before her. The train to Denver would depart tomorrow at noon. Mr. Morley would be waiting at the station, perhaps with his children, expecting to meet his future wife. He was a respectable man who offered security and a comfortable life. She had given her word. But here was Wade, brave, kind, principled Wade, who loved his land and his horses, who defended others without hesitation, who looked at her as though she were the sunrise after a long night. Wade, who had kissed her with such tenderness that her heart still fluttered at the memory. By the time Mr. Peterson returned from the telegraph office, Josephine had reached a decision. She stood as he entered the room, her mind clear for the first time in days. "How is he?" Mr. Peterson asked, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "Improving, I think. He's been more alert each time I've woken him." Josephine gathered her reticule. "I need to return to Mrs. Tully's now, but I was wondering if you could send a telegram for me first." Mr. Peterson nodded. "Of course. The office is still open." Josephine followed him to the telegraph office where she carefully composed her message. "To Mr. Frederick Morley, Denver. Circumstances prevent my arrival tomorrow. Our arrangement must be terminated. Sincerely regret any inconvenience. Josephine Jenkins." As the telegrapher tapped out her message, Josephine felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The path ahead was uncertain, but it felt right in a way that her planned journey to Denver never had. Back at the boarding house, she faced Mrs. Tully's questioning look with calm resolve. "I've decided to stay in Eureka Springs," she announced. "At least for now." Mrs. Tully's eyes twinkled. "Seems you found something worth staying for." "Someone," Josephine corrected with a small smile, "but also something. This town, these children who need a teacher, this community." "Miss Wilson will be pleased," Mrs. Tully observed. "She's been hoping to retire for years." "Nothing's settled yet," Josephine cautioned. "Wade and I have much to discuss when he's recovered, and the town would need to approve my appointment as teacher. Details, Mrs. Tully said with a dismissive wave. "You're meant to be here, child. Sometimes life has a way of putting us exactly where we belong, even if we think we're headed somewhere else entirely." That night, Josephine wrote a long letter to her aunt in Philadelphia, explaining her change in plans and asking for her remaining possessions to be shipped west. As she sealed the envelope, she felt a sense of rightness, of coming home to a place she'd never known she was seeking. The next morning, Josephine went straight to Mr. Peterson's house after breakfast, eager to check on Wade's condition. She found him awake and sitting up in bed, arguing with Dr. Evans about when he could return to the ranch. Not for at least 3 days, the doctor was saying firmly as Josephine entered. That head injury is nothing to trifle with, young man. Wade's scowl melted into a smile when he saw her. Josephine, he said, his voice stronger than it had been the day before. Tell this tyrannical sawbones that I'm perfectly capable of riding home today. I'll do no such thing, Josephine replied, setting down the basket of muffins she'd brought from Mrs. Tully's kitchen. Dr. Evans is right. You need rest and observation. Dr. Evans shot her an approving look. Perhaps you can talk some sense into him, Miss Jenkins. I've other patients to see. He gathered his medical bag and nodded to them both before departing. Alone with Wade, Josephine suddenly felt shy. He looked better today, the confusion gone from his eyes, replaced by his usual alertness, though the bruising along his jaw had darkened and spread. You look like you've got something on your mind, Wade observed, studying her face. Shouldn't you be at the schoolhouse? Josephine moved closer to the bed. Miss Wilson gave me the morning off. She took a deep breath. It's Saturday, Wade. Understanding dawned in his eyes. The train to Denver. It leaves at noon, she confirmed. Wade's expression grew guarded. And will you be on it? Instead of answering directly, Josephine reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded paper, the telegram she had sent the night before. She handed it to Wade, who read it quickly, his eyes widening. You're staying? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Josephine nodded. If you still want me to. Wade reached for her hand, pulling her down to sit beside him on the bed. Want you to, Josephine, I've never wanted anything more in my life. His fingers tightened around hers. But I need to be sure. This is a hard country, a hard life. Nothing like what you'd have had in Denver. Denver would have been comfortable, yes, Josephine acknowledged, but empty. A gilded cage, as Miss Wilson put it. She met his gaze steadily. I want a life of meaning, Wade. A life with someone who sees me as I am, not as a convenient solution to a problem. And you think you could find that meaning here, with me? The vulnerability in his question tore at her heart. I know I could, she said softly. In fact, I already have. These past few days have been more real, more alive than all my years in Philadelphia. Wade's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Then I have something to ask you, Josephine Jenkins. He shifted, wincing slightly at the movement. Not the most romantic setting, I grant you, but I'm not a man to waste time once my mind's made up. And what is your mind made up about? She asked, though her racing heart told her she already knew. That I love you, he said simply. That I want to build a life with you if you'll have me. We've known each other less than a week, which sounds crazy when I say it aloud, but I've never been more certain of anything. Tears sprang to Josephine's eyes. It does sound crazy, she agreed. But then, getting off at the wrong train stop and ending up exactly where I was meant to be seems rather miraculous, doesn't it? Wade laughed, then groaned, pressing a hand to his bandaged head. Careful, don't make me laugh. Doc Evans says it's bad for my concussion. His expression sobered. I'm serious, though, Josephine. I'm asking you to marry me. Not right away, we can have a proper courtship first, if that's what you want. But I need you to know my intentions. Josephine felt a bubble of joy rise within her. Wade Everett, I came west to be a mail-order bride to a man I'd never met. It seems fitting that I'll end up marrying a man I met by accident instead. She leaned forward to kiss him gently. Yes, I'll marry you, though perhaps we should wait until your head is fully healed." Wade pulled her closer, his kiss more thorough this time despite his injuries. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, he grinned. "I suppose I should thank Jake Maddox for that brawl. Without it, you might be halfway to Denver by now." "No," Josephine said thoughtfully. "I think I was already falling in love with you on that ridge, watching you talk about this land you love so much. The fight just made me realize I couldn't bear to leave without knowing if what I felt was real." "It's real," Wade assured her, brushing a strand of hair from her face with tender fingers. "As real as these mountains, this land, this life we'll build together." 3 months later, on a crisp December morning with snow dusting the distant peaks, Josephine Jenkins became Josephine Everett in a simple ceremony at the Eureka Springs church. The entire town turned out for the celebration, from Miss Wilson, officially retired now, with Josephine installed as the new schoolteacher, to the children from the school, who threw handfuls of dried flower petals as the couple emerged into the winter sunshine. Their home at the ES Ranch was ready and waiting, the cabin Wade had rebuilt and expanded over the years. Now brightened with curtains Josephine had sewn and furnished with a few treasured pieces sent from Philadelphia by her aunt. It wasn't grand like the banker's house in Denver would have been, but it was solid and warm and filled with love. As they drove the wagon home after the wedding celebration, Wade pulled Josephine close against the December chill. "Happy, Mrs. Everett?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Josephine looked out at the land that had become her home, the rolling plains now golden brown under their dusting of snow, the distant mountains sharp against the clear blue sky, the ranch buildings nestled in the valley ahead, smoke curling from the chimney of the house that waited for them. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she said truthfully. "Who would have thought that getting off at the wrong train stop would lead me exactly where I was meant to be?" Wade's laugh was warm in the cold air. "Then it was the right stop for me," he said, echoing his words from that first day. "The right stop for both of us." As the horses drew them toward home, Josephine knew with absolute certainty that the life ahead, with its joys and sorrows, its challenges and triumphs, would be richer and more fulfilling than any she could have imagined for herself. She had found not just love, but purpose, community, and belonging in this wild, beautiful country, and with this good, steadfast man beside her. Sometimes, she reflected, the wrong turn leads to the right place after all. In the spring, when the prairie bloomed with wildflowers and new life stirred everywhere, Josephine placed a hand over her still flat stomach and smiled at the secret knowledge she carried. In a few months, she would tell Wade about the new life they had created together, another blessing, another chapter in their unexpected story. For now, though, she was content to stand on the porch of their ranch house, watching Wade work with a young colt in the corral, his movements gentle but firm, his voice a steady murmur of encouragement. This was the life she had chosen, not the safe, predictable path she had planned, but a life vibrant with possibility, rich with meaning, and overflowing with love. It was, she reflected as Wade looked up and waved, smiling that smile that still made her heart skip a beat, exactly where she was meant to be.